centuries, men have used wigs to cover their baldness. The very earliest examples can be traced all the way back to ancient Egypt, where they were stuck to people's heads using beeswax. Imagine the countless generations of men who must have dreamed that one morning they would wake up with a full and replenished head of hair. Last weekend, Wayne Rooney proudly posted a picture of the top of his head on the internet, proclaiming, "I've had a hair transplant. I'm delighted." However, he has to brave, 50,000 people next time he appears in public. What was it like for you? Did you return to work the day after your hair transplant and just have to say nothing about why you suddenly have hair when you didn't before? Did you put on a wig? Was there a moment when you had to brave the office? Do tell us. Let's talk to Paul Oliver, who's consultant for the Vinci Hair Clinic in Manchester. Paul, you've had a hair transplant yourself.
I certainly have, Jeremy. In fact, I've had 3 in total.
Well, I've got a picture of you. I think it must be the most recent one.
That's correct.
Tell us when you started off having them.
Well, I started losing hair when I was 17, so you can imagine how that feels when you're a 17-year-old lad and people start pointing out that you're going bald in the crown. But it didn't really become that noticeable till I was about 21. So that was 33 years ago. It was pretty crude technique back then. It was something called plug grafts. You might remember people like John Cleese had it done, Elton John, quite a few celebrities, but it was very noticeable. So having had that done...
What was plug grafts? You burrow a hole in the skin, do you, or something?
Plug grafts was unlike today where we take individual grafts and put them in one at a time. And I defy people to see a good transplant to say that any difference between that and natural hair. But plug grafts, they used to take 10 grafts at a time and put them in 10 at a time. And the common description of it was doll's hair. If you can imagine how doll's hair looks, it grows in clumps. That's exactly how plug grafts looked. So having had that done at 21, that was fine for a while, but then as other hair receded around it, it became more noticeable. So then I had to do other things. And fortunately, today's technique of FUT, or what Wayne had, FUE, as I say, you can't tell the difference between transplanted hair and non-transplanted hair.
So we're there, are we? We've actually got the Holy Grail now.
No, we haven't got the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail would be to give you a full head of hair. What we can do with transplants is give you hair back, but not to the density you had before you lost any. That we're waiting to happen when they finally learn to clone hair. When they clone hair, you can have as much as you can pay for.
So at the moment they have to take it from somewhere, do they?
Yes, the only person that can give hair to you is yourself, and obviously you can't give yourself so much hair from the back that you've got none at the back and loads on the top. That would be pointless. So we can take a certain percentage from the back, put it onto the top. Now, for guys who've lost a small amount, we can return them back to very close to what they were before. But if you've lost a lot of hair, we can give you a decent result. And if people look at my pictures on the website, you can see what we can achieve, but we can't give you hair like yours, Jeremy. You've got a very fine head of hair. We can't give people that.
Oh, no. I need to get started on some of these techniques, I think. But what's the difference between FUT and FUE, do you think?
FUT is where we take a strip of follicles from the back and the side of the head. Now, that strip of follicles can contain anything up to 3,000 grafts, and then we dissect them up into each individual graft. That's very important. I say back in the day, they used to put them in groups. Now we divide them up and take each individual one. We put them in one at a time. It's a very long process, but it produces natural results. With FUE, there's no strip taken from the back of the head. We remove the grafts one at a time. It is a more expensive technique. It takes a lot more of the surgeon's time. But this alleviates the problem for some people who are worried about having a scar on the back of their head.
So it is fascinating, this sort of technical stuff, but when he's having it done, is he just sitting there reading a magazine or is he out cold?
No, we don't put you to sleep. It's just a local anaesthetic. People either listen to their iPod or they watch a movie. Watching the movie is the most popular. Some people fall asleep because you can't actually feel what they're doing. We anaesthetise the whole area, so whatever they're doing back there, you can't feel it. And some people, well, for my last one, I fell asleep. They had to wake me up at the end and say, we're done.
And how long would it take to do Wayne's, which we can all picture in our minds?
For Wayne's, because it's FUE, you're probably looking at about 8 hours. He may even have spread that over 2 days.
Wow, so he's got to sit there not fidget for quite a long time.
Yes. And that's why it's good to fall asleep, because then it just all passes very quickly and very painlessly, and say they wake you up at the end and say, you have new hair.
Okay, and when those new grafts go in, what makes them grow?
Well, it's the best analogy I can give for that is if you have a plant in your back garden and you dig it up and you plant it in the front garden, eventually the roots take place and it grows. It's pretty simple as that. You're
Really?
taking the root, you're putting it into a different part of the scalp, the blood vessels eventually attach, and it starts to grow just like it would at the back. It grows on the top.
And you're suggesting that at some point they will be able to take you in on the Monday, take some hair, have you back a month later and have grown an entire cloned head of hair from the sample you get, and then they give you the full John Travolta.
Well, they've been working on that for some time. We're all hoping that they finally crack that one. If they can completely clone a sheep, we don't understand why they can't clone a single hair, but they haven't managed it yet. But when they do, then Wayne can have a full head of hair, and everybody else who can afford it can have a full head of hair.
And one last question for you, which is that we were talking about the moment you have to reappear with your new hair,
Yeah.
and sort of steeling yourself for that. Did you have a moment?
Well, that's a very good point, because I always tell people who come in for a consultation that if you can take 2 weeks off work and go back after the 2-week period, so having had it done right at the beginning of the 2 weeks, your appearance is very similar before you had anything done, because the little scabs that are associated with the new hair, they will fall away in 10 days or so. Your scalp will be a little bit pinker, but you can always put that down to the sun this time of year. The little hairs that are attached to the grass, we expect those to fall away in the first 2 weeks, because that isn't the hair that's going to grow for life. That will start to come through in about 3 months' time. And then over 3 months, 4 months, anything up to 9 months or more, your hair just gradually gets thicker and thicker. And because it happens so slowly, you might find this hard to believe, but if you don't tell people, they don't notice. You're very conscious of it. You think everybody's looking at you, but they don't notice. Now, if anybody happens to say, just a minute, don't you have a lot more hair than you had 10 months ago? People say, oh, yeah, this new great shampoo I bought on the internet from America, it's marvellous. They would rather say that than say they've had a transplant. So if you can keep that time period of a couple of weeks, you can go back to work, you can keep it confidential, and that's fine. It's different when you have a hair system or a wig. You go back to work on Monday.
Hair system, is that what they call them now?
That's what they call them today. The people in the business of wigs will never call it a wig. They call it a hair system. Now, when you go with that, you go back to work with that, people talk to your hair. They don't talk to you in the eyes for at least 6 months.
but the hair system does still look good, doesn't it? But it just looks preposterous.
It can. The very expensive ones can look very good. There's a lot of well-known celebrities and sports people out there with them. They can look good, but they take a lot of maintenance. They have to be removed every month and refitted. They have to be recoloured. The scalp underneath has to be washed every month.
Really?
And
do you glue them down?
They're glued on, yeah.
Yeah, so they don't come off in a high wind or anything?
Hopefully not, no. They shouldn't do.
Okay.
But I tried it when I was in my early 30s. I absolutely hated it. I couldn't wait to get rid of it. That was the biggest mistake in hair I've ever made, and I'll never do that again.
Thank you very much for talking to us. Really interesting as well.
Thank you.
Paul Oliver, we love doing technology, and hair is technology really here. Consultant for the Vinci Hair Clinic in Manchester.